Hey everyone, it's Jessie from b.a.r.e Flower Farm, and I'm just doing some planning. Feel like I'm always planning still, but I finished my succession calendar and had a video on that. But one of the next things I wanted to do was make sure that the amount that I put in my calendar for what I'm growing matches what I need to grow for my market. For me, it's really important that I have an outlet when I start growing flowers and just being able to have customers to sell to. So I was very proactive in terms of finding a farmer's market to be able to sell at. And it was actually kind of hard because a lot of the local farmers markets didn't have their pages active and it was hard to get registration information. But I actually found a farmer's market that's going to be about, I think, 18 minutes away from hopefully where we'll live if we're able to close on the house. But not only is it close by, they're also very sustainably oriented. Part of why I'm growing cut flowers is because there's a sustainable mission behind it. And this farmer's market doesn't allow plastic bags, doesn't allow any styrofoam. Everything needs to be grown or produced within like 100-mile radius. So they're really keen on this local, but also, reducing waste where possible. So it's really exciting to be able to sell in an outlet that has values aligned with my business and personal values too. What's also great about this market is that it allows me to pick either every week, so every Sunday, or I can pick bi-weekly, which was the option that I chose. So I will be at this market from the 1st of May all the way basically till year end. Their last market is late November, and then they have a couple of slots for the holiday market. It was super affordable. It was like $300 for basically 16 dates. And I mean, I used to pay sometimes like $250 for a weekend to sell soap. So I feel like this is a steal. When I talk to friends, they're all actually kind of impressed that I got into this farmer's market. So I'm hoping the traffic is going to be good. And speaking to friends who have gone to this market, I realized that it's actually a little bit bigger than I thought it was going to be. So initially I was thinking, I want to do about 25 to 30 bouquets. And now I'm like, I kind of want to up it to 50 bouquets, which is astronomical for me to think about, just because I watch You Can't Eat the Grass and I see what it's like to build 50 bouquets, and it's a lot of work. So I don't know if I'll build 50 bouquets beforehand, if I'll build some during the market, or if I'll sell straight bunches, but I want to be able to grow enough flowers to be able to put together 50 bouquets. The purpose of this episode is to talk about, so how do I figure out how many stems I need, and therefore how many plants I need, and therefore how much space I need. There's one thing that Sunflower Steve says, which is if you're not composting flowers, then you're not growing enough. So we are under contract for a house that sits on 3 acres. So land right now is really not an issue. And as someone who lives in a townhouse, I totally commiserate with people out there who have limited space. So I've gone from one extreme to what feels like the other extreme. Obviously 3 acres in the grand scheme is not a lot, but it's plenty for a hobby cut flower farmer. So I have a lot of space, and therefore I want to make sure that, I'm not biting off more than I chew, but I'm also meticulously planning what I need right now to prepare so that I'm not caught off guard in like June because I need extra flowers and I don't have beds. All right, so let's go through this thought process of how do I figure out how many stems I'm going to ultimately need doing 50 market bouquets a week. And I think 50 is a good number because it's a very easy number to work with. And so the first question that I had to answer for myself is, what does my market bouquet recipe look like? For me, the focal flowers are going to be mainly sunflowers, and they're also going to be the bigger zinnias. I'm still not sure if I'm going to grow dahlias, and I've decided that I'm not going to really, grow anything that grows from tubers or bulbs, just because I don't have the land yet, right? So I would have had lilies in there by now if if I had the chance. But for this season, we're going to focus on the tried and true, which I know are going to be sunflowers and zinnias. And I know this because I also talked to some local florists who were like, you can't grow enough sunflowers or zinnias, especially if you get the cool zinnia colors. All right, so my market bouquet right now, I think is going to look like I'm following what is the general guideline for having the 5 types of flower. So for those of you who aren't aware, that would be having a focal flower, then it would be having a disc flower, then a spike, then a filler, and then something that gives air texture. So I'm thinking about how many stems of each of these 5 categories do I need? So for example, focal flowers, right? I said I was just gonna focus on sunflowers and zinnias. I was thinking that I'm gonna have 3 in there. And typically you have 1 focal flower, right? So if you grow lilies, like that's a great focal flower. If you have a really nice dahlia, that could also be a focal flower. But I've also seen lots of cases where, you're not growing this eye-catching focal, but you're actually having a couple in there that, together feel like that they're focal, right? So I think I'm going to do about 3 sunflowers or bigger zinnias in a bouquet for focal. So the next type of flower would be a disc flower. And this is a supporting flower that enhances the focal flower. So a disc is what it sounds like. It's, disky in nature. So you can think about your rudbeckia, your marigolds, cosmos, even the smaller zinnias would also work here too. And I was thinking that I would have 4 supporting disc flowers here. I'm growing a lot of, I think, disc type flowers. So I don't think I'll have a hard time coming up with stems for this category. The next category is spike. My favorite flower, snapdragon, falls in here. Snapdragons don't tend to do super well in the summer. I grew some rocket last year and they did stop blooming in, I would say, mid-July to August. So I'm not sure how reliable they're going to be, even though I have bought some groups that are supposed to flower better during longer days and, the heat. But ultimately, snapdragons are cooler temperature annual. So I'm definitely going to have a lot of snapdragon for the spring and for the fall. So I'll be good there. But where I don't have snapdragon, I'm going to use flamingo feather celosia to substitute. So I'm thinking I'm going to do 3 per bouquet for my spike. And that brings us to probably the 2 most important categories, filler and air. And these are 2 categories that I constantly see people referring to as, the top 10 mistakes I learned during my first year of flower farm farming, and that is not growing enough filler and air. So I am taking that to heart. I am going to grow a lot of basil. So filler, I'm thinking that 6 stems of basil, and we're talking about basil that basically flowers. So if you pinch, you could probably get quite a few off of a single basil. I'm still not sure how I'm going to pinch. I might pinch half in the beginning and then, pinch more towards the end. But I bought a lot of basil seeds. So that is something I'm going to be succession sowing frequently to make sure that I have enough filler. And then the 5th category is what we call air. And air gives the bouquet interest. It gives it that texture and it gives it a bit of that whimsical type of look. So there are a couple of things that I'm growing in this category. So cress being one of them, Persian cress. I've never grown Persian cress or cress, but it feels like it's very, how do you say it? Like very airy, very wide, right? So a little goes a long way with cress, but I do want to make sure I have enough. So I will be succession sowing that. And then of course, gomphrena. So gomphrena, I think, can act as both air as well as a spike. So we'll see how that goes. But, having 4 stems of those, I think, would do well. The other thing is I am going to be growing a lot of gomphrena and celosia because I do plan on drying them. So I'm also planning to grow more for that reason too. But if we tally up what I just said, I said 3 focals, 4 disc, 3 spikes, 6 filler, and 4 air. That actually gets us to 20 stems. And I'm thinking about pricing my bouquets around the $20 mark. So that feels about right to me that I'm pricing $20 for 20 stems, and hopefully, like the high quality focals will make it worth it. I've heard people say $20, is anywhere from like 20 to 25 stems. So I think it kind of also depends on the market. This market that I'm going to be at is one of those where I hear the locals go to, but it's also, it's actually a preservation area, and there's a lot of activities there. So you get a lot of families who go there with kids on the weekend, and, they're usually driving within the state or Pennsylvania. So they might be driving 40 minutes to an hour, and they're making a day out of it, right? So I feel like for those types of people, spending $20 on a bouquet is probably not a big deal. That's assuming that they're willing to lug it around. But the market does close at 2, so they can do that stuff earlier in the morning and come back to the market. So now that we know that every single bouquet is going to have about 20 stems per, we're going to multiply that out to 50. And then we're also going to have a 20% buffer. So the 20% buffer is something that I've seen a lot of cut flower farmers mention is absolutely necessary, because you don't know what's going to happen. You're going to have stems that break as you're assembling. So like zinnias, for example, are notorious for being a little bit fragile. You might have like a storm that knocks down some of your stems, right? So it could be in the field, or it could be during harvest that you find yourselves in need of stem. So I'm putting a generous 20% buffer, which means that for every 100 stems I need, I'm actually going to grow 20 extra stems. So a total of 120 to make sure that I'm going to have enough stems. All right. So now if we are to multiply out the 50 stems per type, I said before for focal, I wanted to do 3 stems per bouquet. So at 50, that brings you to 150, plus your 20% buffer gets you to a total of 180 stems, which basically means that if I'm going to focus on sunflowers as a stem, I was succession sowing 120 per week. I'm already out unless if I'm going to use zinnias. And I also know I want to sell sunflowers by the bunch, because those do really well according to my the florist that I talked to. And so that gives me no buffer, right? So right away I know I need to order more sunflower seeds, and I need to plant more. So I've actually, based off of this, decided I'm going to try to grow 200 sunflowers per every other week. And I'm hoping that will get me through. If I do the math for the other types of stems, so the disc, right, I said 4 before, so 4 times 50 bouquets is 200 total stems, plus your buffer of 40 brings you to 240 stems of discs. That should be pretty easy for me, because I am growing a wide variety of zinnias, a bunch of which I assume will be, not focal size in nature. So I think I should be good on that end. And then just a lot of the flowers that I picked should do well there. But I think the key there is to make sure that I have a variety, so that it's not always feeling like that I have the same exact bouquets. Spike, so 3 per bouquet. Multiply that out by 50 gets you to 150 stems for 50 bouquets, plus your 20% buffer, which is 30 stems, and that brings you to 180 total stems. Then filler is 6 stems per bouquet, so times 50 is 300, plus your 60 for your 20% buffer, and that gets you to 360 stems. Last but not least, air. So 4 stems times 50 is 200, plus your margin, which is 40, and that gets you to 240. When you do the math, it comes out to a total of 1,200 stems per week. So of course, it doesn't mean that you're growing 1,200 plants. Like I would expect for my zinnias to get at least 7 to 15 stems off of each plant. My sunflowers are pro cut, so I know that they're going to be one and done, right? So easy calculations there. But that's also something I think about, right? Which is, how many stems do I expect to get off of each plant? And you can do a lot of YouTubing, you can do a lot of Googling and research to get to that number. There's a really good book here that And some of the flowers, they have data and trials that show how many stems are produced. So you should be able to get a good ballpark, right? And I know that for things like gomphrena, celosia, I've heard that, you can try to harvest and it doesn't even seem like you've made a dent. So, you can use your good judgment there, but it gives me a rough idea of how many plants I need and therefore space. But before we talk about that, one other thing I'm thinking about is actually how many buckets does this equate to? Because I need to buy buckets, and I'm also thinking about how can I be efficient in this harvesting process. So the typical flower harvesting buckets I've read can typically fit 60 stems. And one of the things that I'm going to be pretty diligent with myself is I'm going to only fit 60 stems per bucket, meaning I'm not going to fill 61 and I'm not going to fill 59, right? Because having a consistent number per bucket also helps later on when you're creating bouquets, because you can do the math, right? Like let's say that you've only used 10 stems, then you know that there's 50 left. You're not left guessing. So when I break it down by buckets and I'm doing 60 stems per bucket, it gets me to a total of 20 buckets. So right then and there, I know I need to be ordering at least 20 buckets for harvest. Obviously, I probably need to be ordering at least another dozen just to have for some other stuff, right? But right then and there, I kind of already know how much I should be calculating to budget aside for buckets. Up until now, we've worked backwards to figure out how many stems we need based on how many bouquets we want. And the next question is, well, how much growing space do I need? So for me, I am going to follow Florette's advice. What Florette does is they do 4 by 70 foot beds with very narrow walkways in between. And I think that's a relatively good width. So I'm going to do 4 feet, but I'm going to shorten it to 40 feet. So I'm doing 4 by 40 feet beds. Now, the varieties that I'm growing will basically all be able to conform to a 9 by 9 spacing. And so the ultimate question becomes, with a 9 by 9 spacing, how many plants can I fit into a 4 by 40 foot bed? And I'm going to walk you through the math and the process that I use, which is super simple and intuitive. One of the easiest things to just ground yourself is knowing that every row is going to take up more or less 1 foot. So in a 4 foot wide bed, we're talking about 4 rows, and then 3 foot wide bed, 3 rows, so forth. So you really shouldn't deviate too much from like 3 to 5 feet, just because it gets hard to pick in the middle if you go too far beyond 4 feet. But I digress. So I said I'm doing 4 by 40 feet. So the next question becomes, in a single row, how many plants can I fit? And I already said that I'm going to do 9-inch spacing. 40 feet times 12 inches per foot gets me to 480 inches. And so if I now divide 480 inches by 9, because every 9 inches I'm going to have a plant, that gets me to 53. So I know in every single row, assuming I'm going to do 70 inches, I'm going to be able to fit 53 plants. And because a bed is 4 foot wide, that's 53 times 4, which gets me to a total number of 213 plants per bed. And that's a pretty sizable amount, right? So I know within one bed, because I'm going to be planting 200 sunflowers per succession, that it's going to be one whole bed, right? So just having a good idea of how many plants I can fit per bed also now allows me to figure out who I can group together based off of both watering needs and my timing for succession sowing. It just gives me a better idea for planning. If you don't have a lot of land to grow on, I know it might feel like that this exercise isn't relevant for you, but I actually think it's equally as beneficial for you to run through. So let's say that you knew exactly how much space you had to grow in. It wasn't a lot, and let's say it's something like a 10 by 4 foot bed. And so you know that you have 40 square feet to grow in. And so what are your limitations in terms of how many total plants can you put in there? Well, if you do the quick math, right, we know that each row is, we know that each foot in width is one whole row. So the question is, how many plants can you fit into 10 feet? So 10 times 12 is 120. Then you divide that by the 9-inch spacing, which gets you to around 23. Which gets you to around 13. And then you multiply that out by 4, right? So you're looking at roughly 50 plants in that entire area. And if I knew I could only play with 50 plants in my growing space, I might rethink my bouquet. I might think, hey, like I might not need air, like I might not need my cress in there to round out a bouquet. I might think that, I want to grow like a bigger focal flower, and then be able to grow a little bit more disc, right? So all I'm trying to say is that it might influence your planning, and it certainly lets you know, if you're planting too much of one type of plant, assuming that you want a well-rounded bouquet. So if this video was helpful for you, please consider giving us a thumbs up and subscribing. It was obviously helpful for me because I'm still going through the planning phase. But yeah, let me know in the comments what you think and if you still have any other questions. So I'll see you next time. Bye.